There are games that let you explore detailed open worlds, others that let you command vast armies and build bases, and still other games that present complex scenarios and puzzles for you to solve. Agori Defender isn't any of those games. It, like many of the other Bionicle Flash games, was made to be played in short bursts like during computer lab hours in school or in the hours after school for the next day. Agori Defender is a short, 7-level tower defense game that released during the eclipse of Bionicle's run, the fateful year of 2010. The toy line of the time was running through the Stars line, a set of smaller Bionicle toys meant to represent key heroes and villains from Bionicle's history. This line, though, was incredibly short-lived and only released 6 total figures. Because of this, there really isn't too much to Agori Defender, at least when compared to the Bionicle games that came before it. But that doesn't mean there isn't something worth experiencing here. Agori Defender has a pretty simple main menu, cycling through several images of the Stars line characters as some intense music plays. The border of the game is actually surprisingly intricate compared to the main menu, put together by several pieces of actual Bionicle parts in monotone gray. I'm actually glad that this border looks so neat, as it will accompany each and every run you do. Now, when you actually click play is when the menu starts to look interesting. After a slick transition with 2 sliding doors, we're sent to the pre-level menu. This is the menu that basically highlights what enemies you'll be facing and how many waves of enemies are in each level. The background is the most interesting part though, as it shows the Fire Toa Tahu standing in the middle of a circle divided into 6 sections, one of them floating ominously in front of him. These sections each represent the 6 levels in the game, and if you actually look closely at the symbols on each section, you'll see that they're actually an overhead view of each of the maps. I really like this attention to detail, as I'm sure it's something that could be easily overlooked, along with the intense heat effects and lava, as well as the music and details like the border. It's clear that a lot of effort was put into the presentation here, even in Bionicle's Twilight era. And so, we slap one of the sections and get zoomed right into the level. Now, if you're unfamiliar with tower defense, it's a fairly popular type of game where you, get this, have to defend your tower. Now, of course, the tower isn't always literal, as it changes based on the theming of each game, but what is consistent is how you defend each tower. The central gimmick of almost every tower defense game is that your opponents move along a fixed path with increasing waves of intensity. This path allows you to build defenses, what essentially amount to turrets, along the path to pick off enemies before they reach the end of the track, invading your tower. Despite this simple premise, there is a shocking variety of gameplay that can be found in tower defense games, from incredibly mainstream titles like Plants vs. Zombies to super creative titles like Rock of Ages, where you play as the invading force going along the track. However, it is a sort of a weird fit for the Bionicle series, as we'll see in a bit. The first map is a fairly simple 2-lane map, providing enough distance along both tracks that enemies are trivial to deal with. And to fight these enemies, we gain access to 5 turrets, essentially characters. And this is a really odd set of characters. To make sense, Toa Tahu and Takunuva, as they're both prominent Toa heroes and 2 of the Stars characters. The Glatorian Gresh is also here and makes sense for similar reasons. But the last 2 don't feel like they fit at all. Unlike Tahu, Takunuva, and Gresh, who are in some way important to the story in Bionicle and part of the Stars line, Strack and Malum are just kinda there. Strack and Malum aren't part of the Stars line, but actually the first wave of Glatorian figures that released about a year prior. There's nothing initially off about that. Gresh is a Glatorian too, albeit with a new figure, but unlike Gresh, Tahu, and Takunuva, Malum and Strack aren't quite stand-up individuals, or, to my knowledge, appeared much in the story at this point. While they aren't necessarily evil, they act more like mercenaries, doing things only for their own benefit. While that doesn't mean they're the wrong choice for this game, it is odd they're here. But let's get back to something that actually matters, the gameplay. As I mentioned before, we have access to 5 types of placeable turrets. These turrets can be placed along any stretch of terrain that isn't the track, and, uniquely in Agori Defender, picked up again after you've placed them. These turrets all have a protodermis cost, which is a currency gained by defeating enemies and waves. All turrets deal damage to enemies, and actually all use the same fireball-like projectile to do so, unlike in other games where each turret has their own unique attack function. Rather, in Agori Defender, each turret has a special ability alongside their normal attack. For example, Tahu deals increased damage to armor, which is the bar above the enemy's health, I think. Game never explicitly explains this, which is a fairly straightforward ability. Others, like Malums, Greshes, and Strax, act as an additional area of effect attack. Malums just deals a large amount of damage in an area, making it easy to pump out large amounts of damage when combined with his already deadly normal attack. Meanwhile, Gresh's and Strax's abilities are more supportive, with Gresh applying a small area of confusion which makes enemies run in a circle, while Strax can freeze enemies in place. Both of these abilities are great for stalling the enemy and for increasing the amount of time that they can be damaged in a certain area. Takanuva's ability is Light, which I think is meant to be an area of effect attack, dealing damage over time, but it felt so ineffectual that I'm not even sure what it does. Regardless, I'm sure you can tell that each turret is meant to have a role to fill, and they do so decently well. These turrets all come with their own trade-offs as well. Tahu, for example, deals the least damage initially due to his cheap protodermis cost, but has a decent range and fire rate, altogether making him the ideal early round pick. Meanwhile, Malum, while having an incredibly high damage, has an incredibly restrictive range and a slower fire rate as well as a much higher protodermis cost. Additionally, these limitations can be worked around or the benefits increased by buying upgrades for the turrets. Range, fire rate, and damage can all be upgraded multiple times to make the ultimate defense. However, each turret must be upgraded individually, and the cost for each subsequent upgrade increase substantially with each tier of upgrade. Because of these factors, the player has to carefully weigh whether they need to set up new turrets, upgrade existing ones, or save protodermis for other features. One of those features, interestingly, is upgrading the protodermis bank. By hoarding protodermis up to a specified amount, first 50, 100, then 150, and so on up to 350, the player can expand the amount of potential total protodermis they can have. This upgrade carries over between levels and affects how much initial protodermis received when beginning a level, so upgrading this bar is a priority. The protodermis is also needed if you want to use special powers. These are one-time abilities that can either deal direct damage to enemies or apply slowness, which makes them ideal to use in emergencies, for when too many enemies push through your defenses. These powers are acquired through the loose story, which also was the main gimmick of the Stars line, that gimmick being collectible armor pieces. Each Stars set contained a certain golden armor piece that, once all collected, would power up Tahu, or any of the Stars figures for that matter. The pieces would fit on any of them. In-game, this story is only mentioned at the beginning and end of the game through cute flash cutscenes, and through the border UI, with each armor piece lighting up after beating each level. Honestly, the UI is one of the things I like most about this game. I talked about the unique game border before, but I also really like the menus for placing turrets and using powers. It's cool how the menu spins and slides out, and once a turret is selected, the menu spins away into a transition with the turret spinning to the ground. It's such a small thing, but makes placing turrets feel really satisfying. So it's clear that proper protodermis management is essential for having a successful run, and aside from defeating enemies in waves, there is a third way to increase your protodermis: game speed. By default, the speed that the enemies go down the track is pretty slow, giving plenty of time to build new defenses and use special powers if something goes awry. but the entire game speed can be cranked up to 4 times, turning the enemies into little ants on crack that become very difficult to react to, meaning it becomes much more important to set up good defenses and rely less on the special powers and moving turrets. The benefit of this increased speed, other than going through waves faster, is that the speed increase also increases protodermis gained from enemies. It essentially becomes a game of balancing the dangers of things going quickly out of control with gaining more money. As for the enemies that you actually fight, they're honestly pretty simple. There are 7 enemy types in total, all being prominent villains from Bionicle past, but in-game the only real differentiating feature between them seems to be how much health they have. They don't have any other mechanics like taking damage only from certain elements or additional speed, so mechanically they all end up feeling pretty samey. And I suppose this is where we start to get into the flaws of this game. So I talked a lot about how important protodermis is and how important it is to manage it by carefully selecting turrets, upgrades, special abilities, and game speed management, all of which determine your success at the game. But that isn't entirely true. Even without messing too much with the game speed, you are rewarded with a lot of protodermis after defeating enemies and waves, meaning careful management of it isn't that essential. You also don't have to carefully weigh what turrets or upgrades to use either. For example, it's more cost-effective to simply spam the map with Tahoos. Why spend a lot on range or firepower upgrades when for far less than half of those costs, I can double my range and firepower anyway? The ability to pick up and move turrets, while a novel idea, also helps diminish the need to manage resources. Placed a turret in a bad area? Pick it up. Need more firepower at a different lane? Pick up your turret. Pair this with the game's short length. There are only 7 maps, with one being a short bonus map, and the game flies by without really changing all that much. That being said, I do like the maps, especially the technically last 6th one. It's an almost trackless map that makes it difficult to predict enemy movements, leading to a lot of chaos, which I think this game needed a lot more of. So is Agori Defender worth checking out now? Honestly, unless you're doing a marathon of Bionicle games like I am, or going through it with challenge runs in mind, I'd say no. There just isn't much here that's worth your time, which is a shame considering this was the last OG Bionicle Flash game ever made, yet also somewhat fitting considering Bionicle's sudden and chaotic end. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.